Hi everyone. Today my guest is Hansie Joubert. Over the past few months, Hansie has completed several grueling ultra-distance rides, varying from 24 hours up to 60 hours. I was wondering, how do you feel and drink to keep going for so long? Stay tuned to find out how Hansie does this. Hansie, after all these long rides that you've done, what's caught my attention is how much effort it must take to actually plan and execute rides of this nature. So let's talk a bit about the planning before you start riding. I'm a bit of a spreadsheet guy, so I put things in schedules and calculate and maybe overanalyze. How do you plan nutrition and hydration before one of these big rides that you do? How much detail do you go into? Do you build a spreadsheet? Do you calculate calories per hour that you're going to burn? And what type of foods at different stages? And is it very scientific or gut feel? How do you go about planning your nutrition and hydration for these big rides?
Carl, yes, thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm going to try to answer as directly and as accurately as possible. Some of the questions is a bit tricky, and it is a huge discussion, what can be. But yes, I use a rough calorie per hour system. I use my fluid intake and my solid foods basically as a combination. I use a rough hour by hour guide, but there's a little bit of science involved, but mostly it's based on my own experience that I've built up over the last couple of years, mainly the last basically 4 years, I would say.
Why the last 4 years, Hansie? What happened before then?
I was more of a road cyclist, and over the last 4 years, I actually ventured more into the ultra endurance rides. So it's very handy to have the road cycling back around the really sharp end of the competitive bunch. So I've learned a lot of tricks there, a lot of survival skills, if you can call it that. And it's really very handy nowadays. And also the efficiency part, you know, how to be efficient. I think a lot of mountain bikers can learn a lot from road cyclists on the efficiency part.
So Hansie, have you always been very scientific about this, or was it always a bit of gut feel, and the science has come in a little bit more lately, now that in the last 4 years, now that you've started doing the longer rides and realized that there's a requirement for a bit more science?
Yeah, I realized there is definitely a requirement for more science, but also on the other hand, it is so specific for every person. So every person has to do his own kind of development of his own plan, and it takes time to develop a strategy like that. But yes, I read up quite a bit about ultra endurance fueling. Unfortunately, there's not that much data available specifically for ultra endurance cycling. Most of the data available is more applicable to the 3 to 4, even 6 hour races, but there's not a lot of info available for if you go 12 hours plus, there's basically no info. But yeah, gut feel comes into play there quite a lot.
So Hansie, I'm curious about this. Do you use a spreadsheet to plan calories? And let's take, for example, a ride like Munga Grit, for example, 24 hours. 24 hour, that probably goes for most of your 24-hour rides. What kind of calories per hour are you would you burn, or do you think that you burn 300, 500 calories per hour? And have you measured this? What's the rough number that you work towards?
The rough number is around about 600 calories, give or take, depending on a good or a bad day. Well, the problem comes in, or the challenge comes in, when you're having a good day. When you're having a good day, obviously you're burning more calories, and you have to be really careful by not overexerting yourself and actually running out of energy. So I'm not that scientific. I know I have to work on a number around about 600 calories. I'm very sensitive. My system is very sensitive for overeating, so I can't overeat. If I eat too much, I get nauseous, and that's a problem. Then the next step is you start to struggle to eat. And that's then basically the end of the race, or end of the high expectations of the race. So I'm very careful in overeating. I literally try to stick to my original plan and basically have a portion every hour and stick to a bottle per hour.
And you've just said a portion per hour. So to make up your 600 calories, you probably eat like one solid a bar or a snack or something like that, and the rest through carbs in the bottle. Is that roughly this how you get to a...
Yes, that's roughly the plan. So my plan is basically one solid per hour, and the rest is made up in the bottle. And then sometimes I carry a small snack with chili sweets or something like that. It's not really sustainable, but it helps in the beginning.
Hansie, and then do you practice this do you still practice this? Did you used to practice it during, maybe go out for a 6-hour or 8-hour ride and practice the eating and try a bit more and a bit less and see what works? And did you used to do practice rides, and do you still do practice rides?
I actually still do it, especially if there's like extreme conditions waiting, or extreme conditions in the race situation. Like typically manga, it can get very hot, so you need to be sure that you can take in fluids and solids while it's 40-45 degrees maybe. So I try to do my weekend rides not necessarily early in the morning. I try to do it around about midday, so that I'm used to the sun, used to the heat, and I'm sure that I can still eat and drink while it's hot.
From a planning perspective and practicing hydration and nutrition, what 2 or 3 tips would you give to, let's say, people that are new to ultra riding in terms of how to go about planning their hydration and their nutrition?
I think it's important for every rider to first be sure of the goal that they want to achieve, whether it is a race, is it a fast race time, is it a podium position? And then according to that, you will basically be able to narrow down your specific needs. But I would suggest to be practical, really be practical in your portion sizes, foodstuffs that you can carry around with you, food that is easy digestible. I know proteins are a big discussion point, using proteins during ultra rides. Me personally, I try to avoid proteins during ultra rides. It's just a personal thing, but every rider needs to experiment, go on long solo rides. I really prefer a solo ride. I think when you're doing a long solo ride, you are more in sync with your body. You can experience your effort a lot more. Whereas if you ride with friends or other buddies, you're not that in tune with your body. So you're not really getting as much feedback as you can when you're riding alone. So yes, I would say be practical and go for long solo rides. That's basically the way I did it.
Let's have a chat about race day, the kind of big ride itself. What do you eat or drink before the start? You got 24 hours ahead of you. Does it make a big difference? I mean, if you're doing a 3-hour or 4-hour ride, maybe it helps of high intensity. Does it make a difference what you eat on a 24-hour, maybe in the half an hour or so before?
Yes, actually my fueling strategy starts about 2 days before the race. About 2 days before the race, I try to cut back on red meat. I would snack a little bit more in between just to make sure that I get all my carbohydrate stores completely full. I would drink a little bit more water and add electrolytes with that. So my diet gets a lot more carbohydrate orientated in the 2 days before the race. Then on the morning of race day, it's very simple. I have my normal breakfast, normally cereals, not too much. I try to limit the portion size. And then basically 5 minutes before the start of the race, I basically start with my first portion of race food, which is normally either a toasted sandwich or a fruit of some kind.
How do you monitor your body for let's say the current status of both hydration as well as energy levels? We spoke about the Super Sapiens device earlier that some athletes are using. How do you monitor? Do do you have something to know that either that you're feeling okay, you know, that you're not, maybe if you're starting to feel nauseous, or in the extreme, if you fall off your bicycle, you must realize that something has gone wrong. How do you monitor? Do you have, I've heard people use a timer, you know, every 30 minutes, a little buzzer goes off or a little alarm. They say time to eat. I've heard of people looking at calories burnt on their Garmin, you know, to see when it's time to eat, or other people work on gut feel, you know, when you're not feeling so well, or whatever kind of, what do you use to monitor for both hydration as well as nutrition, or do you simply just trust the recipe?
I simply just trust the recipe. So I have on my Garmin screen, I will always have either a lap time that indicates hour intervals, or when I have to navigate on one of the data fields is time of day. So I stick to my hourly intervals. Every hour I make sure that I drink at least one bottle of fluids, and have at least, or have one portion of solids. So yeah, there's not a lot of, it's not very involved. It's actually very, very simple, and it works for me.
Hansie, and then in terms of what you eat, real foods. I know when I spoke to Jaco and Jacques previously about, let's say something like a 10-hour race or a 12-hour race, it was a lot of solids in the more solid or real foods in the first half, and then starting to switch over to bars, energy bars, and maybe gels in the last hour or 2 hours or so. But I guess if you're doing a 24-hour, is it the same kind of recipe, real foods or energy bars, or you know, how much of what? And I remember seeing you at the Buffels Big Five. There was a tub of sandwiches. I'm not sure what else was there, but I noticed the sandwiches, maybe because I was hungry. But and I wondered if that was a key part. So once again, on a 24-hour, I guess gels don't feature that much. So what kind of foods would you look at for those long rides?
Yes, I rely mainly on real food, and maybe we can use the Buffelsdrift ride as a quick run through of what I do in a typical day like this. The Buffelsdrift race setup is very simple. It's a lap race. Basically, every 2 hours you go past the start finish, and your food is available, your drink is available. So the setup is actually, and the planning for something like this is very simple. So typically what I did on this day, it was a start at 6 o'clock. I got up around about 4 o'clock, had my cereals for breakfast, drove to the start line. On the way there, I sipped on an electrolyte drink. And then about 5 minutes before the start, I had my toasted sandwich. And then for every lap, for the first 4 laps, I took with 2 bottles of electrolyte drink, and then 1 far bar that I had an hour into the lap. So for the first 4 laps, every lap I had the 2 bottles of electrolyte mix, the 1 far bar in the lap, and then I had a sandwich at the start finish. And then for the last lap, I had also the 2 bottles of electrolyte mix, but I didn't take any solid foods. I just had 2 gels, 1 at the start finish, and then 1 hour into the last lap. And then in between, I just had a packet of glucose sweets with me. So every now and then, when I just felt like putting something in my mouth, I just had a glucose sweet, and that's it.
Hansie, and how do you, let's say this was, so a lap race, that's very convenient when you've got something with you. But let's say on a Munga grid, I guess there's, in 24 hours, you've got quite a few. You probably get to a support station every 2 or 3 hours as well there. You may not have your own food there, but you would you have a similar recipe for Munga grid one?
Yes, very much the same. It can be challenging sometimes at the water points to get food that you can actually take with you on the bike. A lot of these type of races cater for a sit-down food like a plate of pasta or a plate of bobotie and rice, something like that. And it's not necessarily always geared to give you something to take with on the road, which is a bit of a problem for me. They give you gels and bars, but I don't really use gels or bars that early in a ride. I would rather keep that for the last 2 hours or so. So it can be tricky, but you need to look out for, there's always something, fruits, maybe a piece of bread or sandwich lying around. So yeah, there's normally something that can get you through it.
Hansie, and when things start going wrong, because I'm guessing for you, for me, they certainly do go wrong from time to time. And I'm guessing for you maybe as well. You start getting a bit dehydrated. You get low on energy. What are signs that you look out for? Are you I guess you're checking yourself the whole time. You know, whether it's physically or mentally, or what are you looking for the signs to know that you're running short and you need to start making an adjustment?
The easy answer here, or the easier part of the answer, is to be quite sensitive for that feeling of cramps coming up. If you feel the twitch in the muscles, that there might be a cramp coming up, make sure that you top up on your fluid levels, make sure that you get your electrolytes in, and maybe just tap a little bit down on the intensity, and then after about 30 minutes or so, you should be fine again. The bigger problem is when you start struggling with your food intake. And this happens more often than not. And I really don't have an answer for this. I suppose there's different reasons or different causes for this to happen. But yes, I'm still struggling to get the correct answer for that. So yes, I'm still battling through it.
Hansie, what are your specifically food and drink? What you mentioned electrolytes quite often. Is it pure electrolytes? So I'm trying to understand, what are your favorites? What are the things that Hansie likes on the bike? Is it from a food perspective, number one, fruitcake, or you've mentioned sandwiches and you mentioned the far bar. We'll talk about some product preferences in a minute. But food preferences and drink, pure water with electrolytes, or do you put some energy mix in there? So your favorites for food and your favorites for drink.
Favorites for food is basically any food. I really love my toasted cheese and tomato sandwich. It's a must-have for me. The far bars, obviously, and if I have to use gels, I prefer the PVM gels. It's really easy for me to use. Drinks, definitely the Power Bar Isoactive. The nice thing about the Power Bar Isoactive is I can drink it literally for 4 days, and it never gets too sweet. You never get that feeling of you can't get this into your body anymore. So the Power Bar Isoactive is really, for me personally, it is kind of a perfect product for the type of rides I do.
Hansie, I want to move on to what happens after the ride. Is there anything else that you may want to say that you think would be interesting? Like the 1 or 2 key messages or key tips for newer riders in terms of during the race. What are the 2 or 3 things that they must really focus on and to avoid getting into trouble?
Definitely have a clear goal of what you want to achieve, and have a very good idea of what you're going to need to do in terms of effort. Because to be quite honest, the effort that you put in can only be so great. You can only put in so much effort over a period of time. So basically your effort determines how far can you go. So in a long ride, you cannot overexert yourself in the first 3 hours, because you're going to fall off your bike after 6 hours. So you need to keep a check on your effort. Your intensity is key. You need to keep in mind you have to keep going for 24 hours. And believe me, the last 6 hours is not fun and games if you went too hard in the first 3 hours. So keep topped up on your fuel, keep topped up on your hydration, and keep a check on your effort. And that's where a power meter really comes in very handy. So I would suggest anyone that wants to do long rides and doesn't have a power meter, really invest in one. I would say it is quite a handy tool.
Hansie, then the race is over. You got to the finish line, hopefully in the first position. From a nutrition and hydration perspective, life does not stop there. It actually is quite important what happens after that. So let's take the first hour after a 24-hour ride, big effort. What does the first 60 minutes look like? Or do you grab a boerie and a beer and whatever happens happens? Do you pay specific attention to that first hour? What is your approach?
I'm really terrible at this. I wish I could be better, but I'm terrible at this. Normally, after a focus race, I really relax after the race. I have too many beers and too many brandies and worry about the consequences about 3 days later. So yes, I can focus a lot more and a lot better on my recovery. But what I do during huge training blocks is specifically on Saturdays. So I use basically my weekends as big training blocks. And then it's important for me to recover after a Saturday ride so that I can still get a decent ride in on Sunday. So normally after a Saturday ride, I would get home, get into the swimming pool while I'm in the cold water, have a recovery drink, and then immediately after that have a proper meal, normally high in carbohydrates, take a shower, take a nap, and then go out the next morning again.
You've just mentioned swimming pool, and that's triggered something with me which is not related to hydration and nutrition. Is that a key part of your? Is swimming just to cool down and relax, or is it a kind of a strategy for muscle recovery?
It's definitely a strategy for muscle recovery. I just use my cold water pool. It would be better if it's like an ice bath. I get really good results with that. So if I'm really completely close to overtraining, I make a plan to get to an ice bath facility. But yes, cold water, let's call it cold water therapy, really makes a huge difference in my recovery.